Imagine, if you will, stepping into like a high-stakes modern courtroom. You are attempting to claim an inheritance worth billions of dollars. We're talking some multinational empire, sprawling real estate, I mean, the whole 9 yards.
Right.
And the judge looks down from the bench and, he asks for your definitive proof of identity. So you confidently hand over your birth certificate. But then the opposing counsel stands up, walks right over to the judge, and hands over a second birth certificate.
Oh.
Yeah, exactly. And it has your exact name, it has your exact hometown, it lists the exact same birth dates. But, and here's the kicker, the name of your father on this second document is entirely different from the first one.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right. In a 21st century courtroom, you would be immediately investigated for fraud. I mean, the gavel would come down, the case would be dismissed, and you'd honestly probably be facing criminal charges.
Which is, a perfectly rational response in a society where our identity is so strictly biological and bureaucratic. I mean, we demand a singular binary truth.
Right.
One person, one set of DNA, one father, one piece of paper. It's just how our modern minds work.
Exactly. But if you take that exact same scenario, so 2 conflicting documents, literally 2 different fathers for the same person, and you transport it 2,000 years into the past, specifically into the ancient Near East, you aren't looking at fraud at all.
No, not even close.
You are looking at the ultimate ironclad proof of royalty. And that jarring clash of expectations is really the threshold we have to cross today.
Yeah, it's a huge mental shift for the listener.
It really is. So we are taking on one of the most infamous, head-scratching historical puzzles in Western literature today. We're doing a deep dive into the 2 wildly divergent genealogies of Jesus of Nazareth that you find in the New Testament.
It is the quintessential textual dilemma. I mean, anyone who has read these texts hits this wall. You read the Gospel of Matthew and you get one family tree, and then, you turn a few pages over to the Gospel of Luke and you get a completely different family tree.
Totally different.
And for centuries, honestly, this has been the primary weapon used to attack the historical reliability of these texts. People just point to it and say, well, look, it's an obvious error.
Right, they just throw their hands up.
Yeah.
But okay, let's unpack this, because our mission today is to deconstruct this puzzle completely using our source material. And by the time we finish mapping out the political paranoia of the 1st century and the ancient Jewish marriage laws that sound like something straight out of a dynastic political thriller.
You really do.
Yeah. And then, of course, the secret underground archives kept by the literal earthly relatives of Jesus. By the time we go through all of that, those 2 conflicting birth certificates are going to make perfect, elegant sense.
They really will. And I think the friction always begins with how we define the word history.
Oh, for sure.
We approach an ancient text demanding that it perform like a modern county clerk's database. We want a linear genetic swab. But for the writers of ancient Near Eastern texts, and specifically Second Temple Jewish texts, a genealogy was never just a biological ledger. It was this incredibly multifaceted legal instrument.
I look at it kind of like a Swiss Army knife versus a scalpel. Like we use a scalpel today, right?
Yeah.
We want a single precise cut that just tells us who supplied the chromosome.
Right, just the DNA.
Exactly. But ancient genealogies had entirely different blades for entirely different jobs. Establishing a purely genetic link was often the least important function of the actual document.
Yeah, let's actually break those specific functions down because they reframe everything we are about to look at in the text.
Please do.
So, the primary purpose of a genealogy in antiquity was establishing legal rights. And this wasn't just some abstract philosophical concept. It determined physical realities for you. Well, it dictated who had the right to inherit specific tracts of tribal land. And it determined who had the legal, undisputed right to enter the priesthood. In ancient Israel, if you couldn't prove your lineage back to Aaron, you were permanently barred from the altar.
Which actually happened. I mean, reading the source material, there's that famous moment after the Israelites returned from the Babylonian exile in the book of Ezra where certain families claim to be priests, but they literally can't find their names in the public genealogical registers.
Right. They go looking for the records and they just aren't there.
And they are essentially considered polluted, and they're just thrown right out of the priesthood.
Yeah.
The ledger was the absolute law.
It was. And beyond the priesthood, the most critical legal function, and the one that sits at the very epicenter of our deep dive today, is the right to kingship.
Oh, right.
A genealogy was essentially the royal deed to the throne. If you wanted to claim the crown of David, you absolutely needed the paperwork to back it up.
So function one is the legal deed to power or property. What's the second blade on this ancient Swiss Army knife?
That would be covenantal continuity. So the entire worldview of the ancient Israelites was built on the idea that God made specific, unbreakable promises to specific individuals. People like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David.
Right, the patriarchs.
Exactly. So a genealogy was basically a theological roadmap. It proved that those ancient promises were actively surviving the chaos of history.
It traces the line through all the wars and famines.
Yeah, it was a way of tracing that divine spark as it passed from generation to generation, even when they were sent into exile.
It's basically the connective tissue of their entire national identity.
Absolutely. Then you have the third function, which is public tribal affiliation. And this was just absolutely crucial for the basic socioeconomic functioning of the nation. Israel was, as you know, divided into 12 tribes.
Right.
And the physical land of Israel was divided among them. So to prevent one tribe from just buying up all the land and creating a massive imbalance of power, there were incredibly strict laws about property remaining within the original tribe.
So your genealogy was essentially your zip code, your property tax record, and your marriage license all rolled into one document.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
Because you couldn't just marry whoever you wanted and combine your real estate empires without consulting the tribal ledgers, right?
Right. Which leads perfectly into the fourth function, which is theological messaging.
Okay, theological messaging. How does a list of names do that?
Well, the actual structure of the list itself, so who was included, who is intentionally skipped, the numerology of the generations, all of that was designed to tell a story about who this person was in the grand scheme of the cosmos.
And that actually brings up a massive linguistic hurdle that we have to clear before we even look at Matthew and Luke side by side.
Oh, the translation issue.
Yes. It has to do with the translation of a single word, and it's a word that completely trips up modern readers. The word is son.
Right. The Hebrew word, ben, and the Greek equivalent, huios.
Right, because when a modern English speaker, when you read the phrase son of, we visualize an immediate biological first-generation male offspring, a father, a mother, and a baby.
That's our default setting. But the ancient usage of ben and huios was incredibly elastic. I mean, if I call someone a son of David in the first century, I am absolutely not claiming that King David is his immediate biological father.
Right, because David lived 1,000 years earlier.
Exactly. So that phrase son of could mean a direct biological son, yes. But it was just as frequently used to mean a distant descendant. It could mean a grandson, a great-grandson, or, a descendant separated by 20 generations.
Wow.
And even more radically than that, it was used to designate a legal heir or a successor to a title, regardless of biology.
I think the best modern parallel to this is maybe the world of high-level corporate succession, or even better, literary ghostwriting.
Oh, I like that. Walk me through it.
So imagine a massively famous author. Let's just call him Thomas. And Thomas builds this billion-dollar thriller franchise, but then Thomas passes away. However, the publisher wants to keep the franchise alive because it prints money, so they hire a ghostwriter. Now, the ghostwriter does all the physical work they provide, the biological labor of writing the book, so to speak.
Right, they type the words.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when the book is published, whose name is on the cover? Thomas's name is on the cover in giant gold letters.
Oh, sure.
The copyright belongs to Thomas's estate. The royalties go to Thomas's trust fund. So in the legal reality of the publishing world, that new book is the son of Thomas.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. The legal reality, the branding, the inheritance, the continuity of the name, it completely supersedes the biological reality of who actually typed the words.
It's all about the legal rights.
Yeah, and in the ancient Jewish mindset, the legal reality of who held the right to the inheritance was often viewed as way more authentic and more permanent than mere biology. Biology is just the mechanism, right? The law is the enduring truth.
So with that framework totally dismantling our modern expectations, we have to look at the Gospels of Matthew and Luke through an entirely new lens.
We really do.
We aren't looking at them to see who took better notes at the local hospital's maternity ward. We have to look at the theological and legal claims they're constructing. Which brings us to the actual physical texts. Let's lay them out side by side.
All right, so when you place Matthew chapter 1 right next to Luke chapter 3, the divergence between them isn't subtle at all. It is structural, it is directional, and it is deeply theological.
Yeah, let's start with the architecture of the lists, the direction they actually flow. Because Matthew starts at the very beginning of the Jewish story. He starts with Abraham, the patriarch, and he walks forward in time.
Right, descending.
Yeah, he descends down through the centuries, name by name, arriving eventually at Jesus.
It's a very traditional royal chronology.
But Luke throws the whole thing in reverse.
He does.
He starts at the baptism of Jesus.
Yeah.
So a grown man stepping onto the public stage, and he traces the line backward. He goes up, he passes Abraham, he passes Noah, he goes all the way back to Adam, and then he makes this incredible philosophical leap and traces the line back to God.
And that directional flow alone dictates that they're speaking to vastly different audiences. But, the friction that has caused centuries of debate begins when we actually analyze the specific names on these lists.
Right, because for the first chunk of history, they are in total agreement. Matthew and Luke both trace the line from Abraham through Isaac through Jacob down to King David. That massive trunk of the family tree is totally solid. But at King David, the tree is essentially struck by lightning. It splits violently into two completely separate branches.
Yeah. Matthew tracks the lineage forward through David's son Solomon. Now, this is the highly visible, incredibly famous royal line. These are the historic kings of Judah.
Right, these are the guys who built the temple, waged the wars, and ultimately lost the kingdom to Babylon.
Yes, the dynastic ruling monarchy. But Luke, however, bypasses Solomon entirely.
Which is wild.
It is. He traces the lineage through a different son of David, a much lesser-known figure named Nathan. And this is a non-royal, very private branch of the Davidic family.
So from King David, which is 1,000 years before Jesus, Matthew and Luke are walking down two completely different historical paths. They're listing completely different generations of people for centuries.
Right.
But then, after all those centuries of separation, these two disparate branches crash back together at the exact same person.
Joseph.
Yes, Joseph, the earthly father of Jesus.
And this right here is where the modern reader just throws their hands in the air.
Because according to Matthew, the father of Joseph is a man named Jacob. But according to Luke, the father of Joseph is a man named Heli. We have arrived at the ultimate textual crisis. Literally two different fathers for the exact same man.
And the mathematical construction of the list reinforces just how different these two approaches really are. I mean, if you count the names from King David down to Joseph, Matthew only gives us 28 names.
It's just 28.
Just 28. And he doesn't just list them randomly. He organizes them into this highly stylized, rigid structure of 3 groups of 14 generations.
Ah, right. 14 from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the Babylonian exile, and 14 from the exile to the Messiah.
Yes.
It's so perfectly balanced, it almost feels artificial, honestly.
Well, it is entirely intentional. Ancient Hebrews used a system called gematria, where letters also functioned as numbers.
Oh, this part is fascinating. Walk us through that.
So, the name David in Hebrew consists of 3 consonants: Dalet, Vav, Dalet.
Okay.
Dalet is the 4th letter of the alphabet. Vav is the 6th. So 4 plus 6 plus 4 equals 14.
Oh, wow.
Right. By structuring the entire sweep of Jewish history into blocks of 14, Matthew is basically embedding a massive flashing neon sign into the text. He's saying, this is the line of David. This is the ultimate Davidic king.
He is literally weaving the name of David into the mathematical DNA of the genealogy. That is just brilliant.
It is a theological masterpiece.
Wow.
But you have to understand, it requires skipping generations to make the math work perfectly.
Which, as we established earlier with the whole Swiss Army knife thing, was a perfectly acceptable practice for this kind of document.
Exactly. But Luke, conversely, isn't playing the gematria game at all. He lists a continuous, unbroken chain of 41 names for that exact same historical period between David and Joseph.
Wait, 41 names versus 28.
Yep, 41 names.
So we have 28 names in Matthew versus 41 in Luke. We have Jacob, the father of Joseph, versus Heli, the father of Joseph. We have the royal line of Solomon versus the private line of Nathan.
It's a lot of divergence.
It is. And there's one more glaring difference from the sources that reveals this massive theological gulf between these two writers. It involves who actually gets included in the list. Because Matthew makes this radical, honestly scandalous decision to include 5 women in his genealogy.
Which breaks almost every rule of ancient Near Eastern patriarchal record keeping. I mean, you just didn't do that.
It shattered the mold completely. And he doesn't just include any women, right? He includes women with incredibly complicated outsider or, frankly, scandalous narratives. He lists Tamar, who disguised herself to trick her father-in-law into providing an heir. He lists Rahab, who was a Canaanite woman from Jericho.
An outsider.
Yeah. He lists Ruth, a Moabite widow, an absolute foreigner from a despised nation. He lists Bathsheba, whom he pointedly refers to as the wife of Uriah. just highlighting the horrific scandal of King David's adultery and murder.
He doesn't shy away from it.
Not at all. And finally, he lists Mary, a young woman facing the ultimate social scandal of an unexplained pregnancy.
So by weaving these specific women into the royal tapestry, Matthew is effectively dismantling the idea of a pure, untainted, exclusively male aristocratic bloodline.
Wow.
He is arguing that the God of Israel has always used the marginalized, the scandalous, and the outsider to advance the royal covenant. It's a profound theology of grace embedded directly into a simple list of names.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
But then you contrast that with Luke. Luke, the meticulous historian, includes absolutely 0 women in his entire ascending list. None.
Right. His focus is radically different.
Because he isn't making a point about the scandal of grace in the royal line. He is laser-focused on universal human origins, tracing the continuous thread of humanity back through the dust of creation straight to God himself.
Exactly. The structural, numerical, and thematic evidence all points to a single conclusion. Matthew and Luke are not attempting to fulfill the same objective. They are writing 2 entirely different types of legal documents.
Which is, that's a beautiful literary analysis. But let's bring it back down to earth for the bewildered reader right now.
Sure.
Because even if you deeply appreciate the gematria and the theology of grace and the flexibility of the word son, I am still staring at a man named Joseph, who apparently has a father named Jacob and a father named Heli.
You're still stuck on the 2 dads.
Right. As an objective observer, I have to ask, did the early Christian communities just cross their fingers and hope nobody would notice? Did someone just botch the historical record to make the puzzle pieces fit?
And that is the natural modern suspicion. We assume that ancient people were, less critical or perhaps more gullible than we are today.
Yeah, we think they just swallowed contradictions whole.
But the historical record actually proves the exact opposite. The early Christian scholars saw the 2 dads. They saw the mathematical discrepancies between the 28 and 41 names.
They weren't blind to it.
Not at all. And they didn't ignore them. They investigated them with a level of rigor that rivals modern forensic accounting.
So, to understand how they actually solved it, we have to leave the 21st century behind and travel way back to the 3rd century. We need to go look over the shoulders of the ancient detectives.
Yes. And our primary window into this ancient investigation comes from Eusebius of Caesarea.
Eusebius, right?
He was a towering intellectual figure who lived from roughly 260 to 339 AD. Eusebius wrote this sprawling foundational work called the Ecclesiastical History. He was essentially the first great historian of the early church.
But, and this is crucial based on the source, Eusebius wasn't just sitting in a library in the 4th century, inventing a clever excuse for a textual problem, right?
No, not at all. He was an archivist. He was preserving an investigation conducted by a man who lived a full century earlier.
A guy named Julius Africanus.
Exactly, Julius Africanus. He lived from about 160 to 240 AD. And Africanus was an officer, a world traveler, an intellectual who corresponded with the greatest minds of his era.
He wasn't a lightweight.
Definitely not. And when Africanus tackled the problem of the 2 genealogies, he didn't rely on abstract philosophical theories. He went looking for hard data. He actually sought out a specific group of people known as the Despacini.
Okay, the Despacini. This is where the history reads like a blockbuster geopolitical thriller.
Oh, totally.
The word translates to the relatives of the Lord. These were the actual flesh and blood earthly descendants of Jesus' extended family. They were still living in the villages of Nazareth and Corchaba in the 1st and 2nd centuries.
They were the living repository of the family's history. And Africanus records their personal testimony regarding why these specific divergent records existed in the first place and why they were so fiercely protected.
Because it wasn't just casual record keeping.
Right. The story they told Africanus centers entirely on the explosive political paranoia of King Herod the Great.
Okay, we have to paint a picture of Herod for you to understand why this matters. Because Herod was the king of Judea when Jesus was born, but Herod was not a true Israelite.
No, he was Idumean, an Edomite.
Right. His ancestors were forcibly converted to Judaism. He was essentially a puppet king installed by the Roman Senate, backed by the military might of Mark Antony and later Augustus Caesar.
So Herod possessed absolutely no legitimate historical or legal claim to the throne of David. He sat on a throne he bought with Roman gold and maintained with Roman steel.
And because of that, this guy suffered from a pathological inferiority complex.
Yeah.
This is a man who murdered his own wife, Mary Amir, because she was from the legitimate Hasmonean royal family, and he viewed her bloodline as a threat.
He murdered his own sons. I mean, Augustus Caesar famously joked that it was safer to be Herod's pig than his son.
It's dark, but it's true. His entire reign was built on the terrifying insecurity of an illegitimate ruler. And the ultimate threat to his power wasn't a foreign army. It was the ancient genealogical archives kept in the temple at Jerusalem.
Because those public records proved exactly who the true descendants of King David were.
Exactly. So, according to the historical tradition preserved by the Despoticini, Herod did what every terrified dictator does. He burned the evidence.
Wow.
He systematically destroyed the public genealogical registers of the Israelite families. He figured if the paperwork was reduced to ash, no one could pull a dusty scroll out of the temple library and definitively challenge his right to rule.
If no one has a pedigree, his lack of one doesn't matter.
Precisely. It was an act of cultural erasure designed to solidify his dynasty. But it had a massive unintended consequence.
Right, because it forced the true, legitimate descendants of the Davidic line, which obviously included the extended family of Jesus, to take their history underground. They became genealogical preppers, essentially.
That's exactly what they were. The Despoticini told Africanus that they relied on their own private, fiercely guarded family archives. They committed the lineages to memory. They passed them down through oral tradition and hidden scrolls, preserving the true royal heritage while this illegitimate king paraded around in Jerusalem.
And this narrative provides such crucial context because it tells us that the early Christians weren't dealing with sloppy, forgotten histories. They were dealing with highly sensitive, heavily guarded dynastic secrets.
Which changes everything.
It really does.
Right.
So when Julius Africanus sat down with these private family records to solve the discrepancy between Matthew and Luke, he discovered that the solution didn't require some weird textual gymnastics.
Right.
It required a deep understanding of ancient Jewish jurisprudence.
He found the answer hidden inside the law itself. Because Africanus realized that the two genealogies were utilizing two different, completely legally binding methods of tracking a family tree.
Yes. So the first mechanism is the concept of dual reckoning. Ancient Jewish law fully recognized that a person possessed a lineage according to nature, so their strict biological genetic descent, and a parallel lineage according to law, which was their legal inheritance, their tribal succession, and the preservation of their name.
Which brings us right back to our ghostwriter analogy from earlier, the biological writer and the legal author on the cover.
Exactly. But of course, the obvious question is, how does a single person end up with two different fathers on paper in the first place?
Right, how does that actually happen?
That requires the second mechanism, which is the absolute linchpin of this entire mystery. It is a specific ancient statute known as levirate marriage.
Levirate marriage. Okay, this is the concept that unlocks the vault for us today. Because if you just read the text, it sounds like an impossibly convoluted soap opera.
It does.
But when you apply this specific law, the math suddenly works perfectly.
Yeah, the law is explicitly detailed in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 25. So, in an ancient agrarian society, your name, your family line, and your ancestral land were literally your only forms of immortality.
That's all they had.
Right. So if a man died childless, his lineage was extinguished. The land would pass to distant relatives or be lost to the tribe. The absolute worst fate imaginable for an ancient Israelite was for his name to be blotted out of Israel.
It was a form of sociological death
That extended way beyond the grave, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So to prevent this tragedy, the Mosaic Law instituted a safety net. If a man dies without an heir, his surviving brother or his closest male kinsman is legally obligated to step in.
Okay, step in how?
The brother marries the grieving widow, they conceive a child together. But here is where the ancient legal mind diverges so sharply from our modern biological obsession. That firstborn child does not legally belong to the biological father who provided the seed.
So the biological father is really just a proxy.
Yes, he is fulfilling a sacred duty. Under the law, that child is registered in the public archives under the name of the deceased brother.
Oh, wow.
The child inherits the dead man's property. The child carries the dead man's legacy forward. The biological father steps back, legally speaking, so that his brother's name is not blotted out.
That is fascinating. So Julius Africanus took this very real, very documented ancient law, and he overlaid it onto the diverging family trees in Matthew and Luke.
He did.
And he used the private records of the Despoticini to reconstruct the exact family history of Joseph.
It is a brilliant piece of historical deduction.
It really is.
Yeah.
Let's actually walk through the exact multi-generational sequence of events that Africanus mapped out. We need to track these marriages and the children step by step so you can see how perfectly it fits.
All right, let's do it. It begins 2 generations before Joseph with a woman named Esther. Esther is really the matriarch of this complicated narrative. So Esther marries a man named Mathan.
Now, Mathan's pedigree is crucial here, right? Mathan is a direct, undisputed descendant of King Solomon. He is firmly embedded in the royal dynastic line of the kings of Judah.
Yes.
And this is the line that the Gospel of Matthew is meticulously tracking.
Exactly. So Mathan and Esther marry, and they have a biological son. They name him Jacob.
Okay, so Jacob is born. Biologically and legally, he is of the royal line of Solomon.
Right. But then tragedy strikes the family. Mathan passes away. Esther is left a widow. And, after a period of mourning, the cultural expectation is that she will remarry, which she does.
Right.
Her second husband is a man named Melchi.
And Melchi brings a completely different pedigree to the table.
Yeah.
Melchi is not from the royal line of Solomon.
No.
Melchi is a descendant of Nathan, that alternative private branch of King David's family. And this is the line that the Gospel of Luke is tracking.
You've got it. So Melchi and Esther conceive a son together, and they name him Heli.
Okay, let's freeze the timeline right here and just look at the family dynamic. Esther is the mother to both boys. She had Jacob with her first husband, the royal Mathan. She had Heli with her second husband, the non-royal Melchi. So Jacob and Heli are uterine half-brothers. They grew up in the exact same household, they shared the same mother, but they carry the DNA of 2 totally separate branches of King David's descendants.
Which is a perfectly normal, if slightly complex, blended ancient family.
Right.
But then the timeline moves forward. The boys grow up. Heli marries. And then a second tragedy strikes the family. Heli dies, and he dies completely childless.
Oh, wow.
He leaves behind a widow, no heir, and the terrifying prospect that his name and his connection to the line of Nathan will be permanently blotted out of the tribal registry.
Which triggers the ancient safety net.
Yes.
The law of Deuteronomy 25 is activated. Heli's closest living male relative is his half-brother, Jacob. So Jacob, recognizing his covenantal duty to his brother's memory, steps in. He marries his half-brother Heli's widow. Jacob and this widow conceive a son, and they name that son Joseph.
And suddenly, the impossible contradiction vanishes. The 2 diverging paths converge completely seamlessly.
That is just incredible. Let's lay out the final reality for Joseph, because biologically, genetically, naturally, Joseph is the son of Jacob.
Yes.
Jacob provided the DNA. And because Jacob is a direct descendant of the royal line of Solomon, Joseph biologically inherits that royal dynastic bloodline. Matthew is the genealogist of nature. He traces the biological royal descent down through Solomon to Mathan, to Jacob, and finally to Joseph.
Spot on. But Matthew's record is only half the truth. Legally, under the unbreakable binding law of the Torah, Joseph is the son of the deceased brother, Heli.
Because of the Levirate law.
Exactly. Joseph is Heli's legal heir. He was registered in the tribal archives as Heli's son to keep Heli's branch of the family alive. And because Heli was a descendant of the line of Nathan, Joseph legally inherits that specific tribal lineage too. So Luke is the genealogist of the law. He traces the legal Levirate descent up from Joseph, to his legal father Heli, to Melchi, all the way up through Nathan.
Meaning both men are telling the absolute historical truth.
They are.
Matthew basically says, here is the biological seed that gives him the royal right. And Luke says, here is the legal reality that preserves his tribal standing. Matthew isn't lying, and Luke isn't confused. They're simply operating the different tools on the ancient Swiss Army knife.
It is a breathtaking harmonization. And it's breathtaking because it doesn't require us to twist the text at all. It only requires us to understand the culture that produced the text. The contradiction literally only exists in the mind of a modern reader who doesn't understand Levirate law.
Which is a massive paradigm shift. But it leaves us with an incredibly important question regarding authorial intent.
How so?
Well, Matthew and Luke didn't just accidentally stumble into using these different systems. They didn't flip a coin. They chose these specific lineages, the biological royal line versus the legal universal line with surgical precision.
Oh, absolutely. They were theologians crafting a narrative for vastly different audiences. The genealogies are essentially the thesis statements of their respective gospels.
So let's dig into the why. Why does Matthew plant his flag so firmly in the biological royal line of Solomon?
We have to look at who Matthew was actually trying to persuade. Matthew's gospel is profoundly, unapologetically Jewish. He is writing to a community of first-century Jewish Christians and Jewish skeptics.
Right.
And for a first-century Jew living under the crushing boot of the Roman occupation, the concept of the Messiah wasn't just a vague, comforting, spiritual idea.
No.
The Messiah was a highly specific, highly anticipated political and military figure. The Messiah had to be the anointed king, the literal heir to the throne of David, who would restore the glory of the nation.
And if you were going to claim that a carpenter from the backwater region of Galilee is the true king of Israel, you better have the dynastic receipts.
Precisely. To a Jewish audience, the Messiah's claim is completely invalid if he does not have an unquestionable biological link to the royal kings of Judah.
So Matthew's genealogy is basically a covenantal battle cry.
It is. It highlights the fulfillment of the ancient promises made to Abraham. It parades the dynastic succession of the kings. That highly stylized, gematria-laden structure of 14 generations we talked about earlier, that is a royal proclamation.
Right, the flashing neon sign.
Yes, it screams, look at the math, look at the kings, look at the biology. Jesus is the legal royal heir to the throne.
But then you open the Gospel of Luke, and Luke is operating in a completely different rhetorical universe.
Entirely different.
Because Luke is a Gentile, writing primarily to a Gentile Hellenistic audience. He is writing for Greeks, for Romans, for people living across the vast expanse of the Roman Empire.
And we have to ask ourselves, how much does a Roman citizen living in Corinth or Ephesus care about the dynastic squabbles of the kings of Judah?
Probably not at all. I mean, if anything, parading a list of rebellious Jewish kings might actually alienate a Roman audience.
Exactly, they wouldn't care. But what a Roman citizen was intimately familiar with was the concept of imperial divinity.
Ah, right. The emperors.
Yes. The Roman emperors used genealogies as blatant propaganda. Augustus Caesar constantly promoted his lineage, tracing his family tree back to Aeneas and the goddess Venus. The emperor claimed to be the son of God, ruling the world by divine aristocratic right.
So Luke counters the propaganda of the empire with a radically subversive genealogy of his own.
Yes. Luke bypasses the scandalous, politically charged kings of Judah altogether.
Yeah.
He traces the legal levirate line through Nathan, and he refuses to stop at Abraham, the father of the Jewish nation.
Right, he keeps pushing backward in time.
He goes past the patriarchs, past Noah, all the way back to Adam, the father of the human race. And he traces Adam directly to God.
It's an incredibly provocative political and theological statement. Because by tracing the line to Adam, Luke is stripping away nationalistic borders. He is demonstrating Jesus' absolute flesh and blood solidarity with every single human being on the planet.
It emphasizes radical inclusion. The Roman emperor claimed a divine lineage that elevated him above the masses, giving him the right to subjugate them. But Luke's genealogy claims a divine lineage that intimately connects Jesus to the lowest slave in the empire. Matthew presents the long-awaited King of Israel. Luke presents the universal savior of humanity.
And the dual genealogies allow both of these massive theological truths to be grounded in the historical reality of Joseph's complex blended family.
Exactly.
Now, there is a lingering technicality here that I know someone listening is already thinking about, and it's a huge one.
Okay, let's hear it.
We have spent this entire deep dive dissecting the family tree of Joseph. We've looked at his biological father and his legal father. But under the core theological premise of the New Testament, which is the virgin birth, Joseph isn't the biological father of Jesus.
Right.
Legally, yes, he is the adoptive father, which passes the royal rights to Jesus. But what about Mary? If Jesus is biologically connected to Mary alone, does this incredibly elegant, levered harmonization leave Mary's royal lineage completely unproven?
It's a critical question, but the ancient legal code actually covers this space as well.
It does.
It does. We have to look at another layer of ancient tribal law to see how Mary's lineage is implicitly guaranteed by Joseph's. The key is found in the book of Numbers, specifically chapter 36, in the laws concerning the daughters of Zelophehad.
Right. Okay, this is a fascinating piece of ancient jurisprudence. Zelophehad was a man who died, leaving only daughters, no sons.
Correct.
And the daughters went to Moses and basically said, look, it isn't fair that our father's land should be lost just because he didn't have a boy.
Right.
We should inherit the land. And Moses agreed.
It was a very progressive ruling for its time, allowing women to inherit property. But as with all legal changes, it created a massive socioeconomic problem down the line.
How so?
Well, if those daughters, who now owned large tracts of tribal land, married men from a different tribe, say, they were from the tribe of Manasseh and they married men from the tribe of Judah, that land would permanently transfer to the tribe of Judah.
Oh, I see. So over a few generations, the entire map of Israel would be violently destabilized as tribes gobbled up each other's territory through strategic marriages.
Exactly. It would be a total real estate monopoly.
Right.
To prevent this, the law in Numbers 36 established a strict mandate. It said if an Israelite woman was an heiress, she was legally required to marry within her own specific tribe. The land had to stay within the ancestral borders.
Okay, but how does ancient real estate law solve the problem of Mary's lineage?
It establishes the cultural and legal environment of first-century Jewish marriage. Both Matthew and Luke are absolutely adamant and fiercely protective of the fact that Joseph is of the tribe of Judah, specifically of the royal house of David.
Right.
Given the strict tribal marriage laws, particularly for families of prominence or families holding ancestral land, it was overwhelmingly probable, honestly bordering on legal necessity, that Mary was also of the tribe of Judah and the house of David.
Oh, okay. So by proving Joseph's Davidic lineage with such overwhelming dual reckon documentation, the gospel writers are actually sending an implicit, culturally understood signal to their ancient audience.
Exactly.
They're saying Mary, too, is of the house of David.
It seals the argument completely. The biological requirement through Mary and the legal dynastic requirement through Joseph are both perfectly fulfilled.
Okay, this harmonization theory, formulated by Julius Africanus, is incredibly persuasive. I mean, it respects the cultural context, it aligns with ancient legal statutes, and it illuminates the theological goals of the authors.
It hits all the marks.
But, history is never without its skeptics. Modern scholars and even ancient ones have poked and prodded at this theory for centuries. And I really want to stress test this harmonization.
Let's do it.
I want to run it through a gauntlet of the most common pushbacks from the source material and see if the structural integrity actually holds up.
I am ready. Let's see if the bridge collapses.
All right, pushback number 1, the missing qualifier. Let's look at Luke's text again. If Luke is giving us this incredibly nuanced, legally binding levirate line, why is he so vague about it?
Vague how?
Well, Luke explicitly writes the words, Joseph, the son of Heli. Why in the world wouldn't he just write Joseph, the legal son of Heli? Why leave this trapdoor of ambiguity that would cause centuries of debate?
Because that expectation demands an ancient writer to conform to a modern bureaucratic standard. Ancient genealogies simply did not append qualifiers like legal, biological, or adoptive. It just wasn't the convention of the genre. The original audience understood the cultural context inherently.
Okay, but can we prove that? Like, are there other examples in the historical record where a man is listed as the son of someone who isn't his biological father, with zero explanation given in the text?
Oh, absolutely. It happens in the Old Testament, and the ancient Jewish scribes never blinked an eye. Take the figure of Zerubbabel.
Zerubbabel.
Yeah, he was the great leader who guided the Israelites back to Jerusalem after the Babylonian captivity. Now, if you pull out the genealogical records in 1 Chronicles chapter 3, the text states plainly that Zerubbabel is the son of Pedaiah. But if you read the historical books of Ezra or Haggai, they explicitly and repeatedly call Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel.
We have two different dads again.
Yes. And ancient Jewish commentators never claimed it was a glaring error. They understood that this divergence reflected the exact same kind of levirate marriage or adoption customs we see in Joseph's family tree. Neither text bothered to write Zerubbabel, the legal son of Shealtiel.
They just wrote son of.
Exactly. Luke's phrasing perfectly mirrors the conventions of ancient legal inheritance registers, where a child raised up to preserve a dead man's name was simply registered under that name. To an ancient reader, no extra qualifying adjective was required.
Okay, so the convention of the genre defense, that holds up really well. Let's move to pushback number 2. Now, this is probably the most popular modern workaround. I hear this in Sunday school classes all the time.
Oh, the Mary theory.
Yes, the Mary theory. People say, you are making this way too complicated with levirate laws and half-brothers. The solution is simple. Matthew is giving us Joseph's family tree, and Luke is actually giving us Mary's family tree. Heli isn't Joseph's father. Heli is Mary's father, which makes him Joseph's father-in-law. Boom. Problem solved without needing a law degree in Deuteronomy.
It is a remarkably neat and tidy solution, I'll admit. It is highly appealing to the modern mind. The only problem is that it has almost zero historical or grammatical basis.
Ouch. Okay, let's start with the history. Did anyone in the early church believe this?
No. Historically, this view is entirely absent from the earliest centuries of Christianity. When you read Eusebius, when you read Julius Africanus, when you read the major patristic writers of the 2nd and 3rd centuries, they universally treat both genealogies as belonging to Joseph.
So where did it come from?
The Mary theory didn't begin to gain serious traction until centuries later, primarily as the church became increasingly Gentile and increasingly distanced from its Jewish roots. Later Gentile scholars simply didn't understand the nuances of Jewish levirate law, so they invented a biological workaround that fit their cultural assumptions.
Ah, so it's a retroactive fix. But what about the grammar? Doesn't the Greek text of Luke allow for Heli to be the father-in-law?
Structurally, no. It requires doing significant violence to the text. Luke 3:23 explicitly reads, Jesus being the son, as was supposed, of Joseph, the son of Heli.
Right.
The Greek grammar unequivocally ties the continuous lineage to Joseph, the male head of the household. As we established, Mary's Davidic descent is powerfully implied by tribal marriage customs, but linguistically, Luke is providing Joseph's legal line. Trying to force the text to become Mary's genealogy is really an act of modern desperation, not ancient exegesis.
Okay, so the Mary theory is off the table. Let's move to pushback number 3, and this one targets the ancient detective himself. I want to read a direct quote from Julius Africanus from the source text.
Go for it.
When he is writing out this incredibly detailed theory about Mathan, Melchi, Esta, and the levirate marriage, he includes this massive caveat. He writes, although we can urge no testimony in its support, we have nothing better or truer to offer.
Right. It is the quote that every skeptic circles in red ink.
Because he says no testimony in its support. So does this mean Africanus just sat in his study, rubbed his chin, and basically hallucinated this entire levirate marriage scenario because it made the math work? Did he just invent it out of thin air?
We really have to understand what an ancient historian meant by the word testimony. When Africanus says he lacks testimony, he means he does not possess a primary, written, notarized papyrus document from the 1st century that says, I, Jacob, hereby marry the widow of my half-brother Heli.
He lacks definitive external documentary proof.
Right, because, as we established earlier, King Herod burned the public archives. The documents were literally ashes.
Oh, right. The paranoid dictator destroyed the paper trail.
Exactly. But lacking a piece of paper does not mean he fabricated the history. Ancient historians valued internal coherence, cultural plausibility, and deeply rooted oral tradition just as highly as written records.
So he's not apologizing for a weak theory.
No, Africanus is just being transparent. He is saying, I cannot show you the birth certificates, but I have the oral traditions preserved by the Despacini, the family themselves. And when we apply documented, undeniable Jewish legal practice to the divergent texts, it fits together perfectly.
He is engaging in pure historical deduction. He is looking at the effect two different fathers and applying the only known cultural cause levirate law that perfectly explains it.
Yes, Eusebius preserves this theory not because it came with a stack of notarized affidavits, but because it is the most logically reasoned, historically grounded, culturally accurate harmonization available. It solves the puzzle using the actual rules of the society that created the puzzle.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, final pushback. Pushback number 4. This one is about the physical manuscripts. If you look at different ancient handwritten copies of the Gospel of Luke, there are minor variations, right?
Sure, there are.
Some manuscripts might have a slightly different spelling. Some might say son of Mathat instead of son of Heli, or they might skip a lesser-known name entirely. If the text itself has minor scribal typos, doesn't that throw a wrench in the whole perfectly calculated step-by-step levirate machine?
It's a fair observation about ancient manuscript transmission, absolutely. But it misses the forest for the trees. The levirate harmonization doesn't rely on the flawless spelling of every single name across thousands of hand-copied manuscripts.
It doesn't.
No. The harmonization solves the structural dilemma. It explains the core reality. Why two diverging lines stemming from King David suddenly crash back together, resulting in two totally different fathers for Joseph.
So even if an exhausted monk in a scriptorium in the 6th century accidentally skipped a name or misspelled Heli, the underlying mechanism of how a man can have a biological father and a legal father remains completely intact.
Exactly. The structural integrity of the bridge holds, even if a few of the rivets have the wrong name etched on them. The mechanism of dual reckoning is the solution, regardless of minor textual variants.
Well, we have covered an immense amount of historical ground today. I mean, we have debated ancient Swiss Army knife documents, we've outlined the political paranoia of King Herod, we've walked through the complex legal mechanisms of levirate marriage, and we've mapped out the theological master plans of Matthew and Luke.
It's been a journey.
It has. But what does this all mean? When we step back from the ancient archives and look at our own world today, why does this massive historical puzzle actually matter to the listener?
There are a few profound takeaways from the sources that really shift how we interact with history and information. The first is a lesson in historical integrity. This entire deep dive proves that the early Christian communities were not naive, blind followers who ignored the massive difficulties in their texts. They didn't bury their heads in the sand when they saw a contradiction.
They actually leaned into the friction.
They engaged with it critically. They utilized cultural, legal, and theological tools to seek a coherent truth. It demonstrates that the ancient church possessed a really high degree of scholarly rigor.
What's the second takeaway?
The second is what we might call hermeneutical humility. Now, that is a fancy academic phrase, but it simply means we need to be incredibly humble about how we interpret ancient documents.
Right, like we cannot drag a first century text into a 21st century courtroom and judge it by our modern rules of evidence.
Exactly. We cannot impose our modern obsession with purely biological binary data onto cultures that valued legal inheritance and covenantal continuity just as highly. When we recognize that these genealogies functioned as legal and theological deeds, we stop demanding the text be something it was never designed to be in the first place. We restore its proper context.
And when you restore the context, the contradiction just dissolves.
It does, which leads to the final takeaway: apologetic clarity. The dual genealogy is not an embarrassing flaw in the New Testament. It is a profound, incredibly complex feature.
A feature, not a bug.
Exactly. It proves that Jesus of Nazareth is fully qualified as the Messiah from every conceivable angle. He is biologically and legally entitled to the throne of David through Matthew's royal line, and he is biologically human and universally relevant to all people through Luke's line. The two records do not cancel each other out. They converge to give a complete, multi-dimensional portrait.
I think that is the most powerful takeaway of all. Apparent contradictions, the things that make us want to throw our hands up, close the book, and just walk away in frustration, they so often dissolve when we just take the time to step out of our own worldview and step into the cultural framework of the authors.
It's so true.
It's a shortcut to being deeply well-informed. You don't have to be intimidated by the complex, confusing parts of history.
Knowledge is most valuable when it is understood within its proper context. It turns a stumbling block into a stepping stone for deeper understanding.
It really does. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. Something that builds on everything we've just discussed, but points directly at how we live today.
Okay.
We opened this deep dive by talking about how much we, in the modern world, expect absolute biological precision.
Right.
We love our DNA swabs. We love our ancestry websites. We map our genetics to see exactly what percentage of our blood comes from what geographic region. We are a culture absolutely hyper-focused on purely genetic ancestry.
Yeah, we really define our identity almost entirely by our biology.
We do. But think about what we just learned from the ancient world today. They valued legal legacy, communal duty, and covenantal promises just as highly, if not more highly, than strict biological DNA. In an ancient culture, a man could look at his child and say, "Your true legacy isn't just the blood in your veins. Your legacy is the brother I honored, the name we kept alive, and the community we preserved."
That's a power.
If an ancient society could view family and identity through such a broad, legally and communally rich lens, it makes you wonder, how might our modern hyper-focus on purely genetic ancestry actually be blinding us? In our obsession with the biology of a birth certificate, are we missing out on broader, richer definitions of what truly makes a family? Are we losing the understanding of what it really means to leave a lasting legacy? It's definitely something to think about the next time you look at a family tree.
A fascinating question to end on. Identity is always larger than biology.
Thanks for diving deep with us.